All right, welcome everybody. So we are working on our Rambam series. Last week, we went through like the first 10 pages of it. So we're going to pick up where we left off. I don't really want to do a review. So if you didn't watch last week, go back and watch the first one in that series. Because if you just pick up on the part two of anything, even if you understand what's going on, you're going to miss a lot of context by not getting the first part of it. Okay, share screen. Back to Microsoft Word here. Okay, so this is where we started last week. We went through the first 10 pages, further down, 10 or 11. To Xiaomi. Okay, right here. This is where we left off. Okay, so key themes in Rambam's thought: theology versus literalism. He emphasizes that agadic stories are often allegorical, conveying deeper truths rather than literal history. So, Agadah or Agadata, difference between Hebrew and Aramaic, non literal stories. He critiques them both, those who take midrashim, folklore, and legend too literally, and those who dismiss them as superstition. He actually said he wanted to write a book because, one that I take literally, you might take to mean it's just conveying a message or story, and vice versa. So he actually wanted to write a book letting you know which ones were literal and which ones were not. That would eliminate the subjectivity to it, and that would also date them. So if they're not in this book, then you know it was one that was invented later. But he didn't get around to that, unfortunately. Okay, end of days concept. You've heard the term Olam Haba or Olam Haba, the world to come. This is the spiritual realm where souls exists after death. It's not a future world, it exists right now. It's the world of souls with no physicality. We call it the world to come because for us that are alive today, we haven't died yet. So for us, it's yet to come. It's in our future. But those who have already died, they already went to it. So they are experiencing it now. It's not like they're waiting for the appointed time. And those of us who are alive will be dead and will experience it with those who have already died. They went to it. So it's happening right now. It's just not happening for us because we haven't died. So when you hear things about, children that can tell you their past life, they've already experienced these types of things, and there's compelling arguments. Hospice nurses can tell you about people before they die that they're experiencing things that's pretty convincing. Rambam would be of that view that these things are at least possible because it's not something that's going to happen in the future that we have to wait for. So, the Messianic era, a future physical era of Jewish sovereignty, temple restoration, and universal peace. Universal peace for us. This life phenomenon, not Olam Haba. Although Olam Haba will still exist then because people will still die then, including Mashiach. So Olam Haba will still exist as a way that things function. So the very popular version of the Messianic era is the whole world will be united to one religion. Nations will not know war anymore. There's not going to be any more wars. Um, his actual view is that it just means the Messiah is going to be a human being who will preside over the land of Israel during a time of peace. He gets it from the Bar Kokhba revolt. Rabbi Akiva's view was that Bar Kokhba could be the Messiah. And because he thought Bar Kokhba was going to be successful in his revolt against the Romans. Nobody expected Bar Kokhba to perform miracles. So that's where Rambam gets his idea of Mashiach from. So he says he's going to be just a normal human being, like a king or a political leader, who's going to preside over the land of Israel in a time of peace. for the land, meaning we'll be able to study Torah without being at war with surrounding nations. Other surrounding nations might still be at war with each other. Pakistan and India may still be fighting. Russia and Ukraine may still fight, but the Messiah will just be the leader of the land of Israel, who will preside over a time of peace. He has no expectations of miracles being performed. He has no views that animals will become vegetarians, tigers will still be eating goats. That's Rambam's view of Mashiach and the Messianic era, which is interesting because people will say, "Oh, well, you have to believe in Rambam's 13 principles." We're going to get to that, but one of them is belief in Mashiach. But most people telling you you have to believe these 13 principles, including belief in Mashiach, do not believe in Mashiach the way Rambam did. Okay, resurrection of the dead. This is one of the 13 principles. It's one that he does not talk about a lot. And it's almost like he just added it as a concession. He's like, okay, everyone's believing in this, fine. I believe in it too. But they'll resurrect only to die again. And that's really about all he says. He doesn't go into a lot of details like he does with all of the other principles. Okay, he was a physician to the Sultan of Egypt. So he did a lot of work on medicine as well as religion. He integrated medical knowledge with Torah, viewing health as a means to spiritual fulfillment, not an end in itself. He says addiction and to food and addiction to exercise are both bad. One is not morally worse than the other. So usually we think if somebody's addicted to food, that they're a glutton, which leads to bad health. And there's an argument for that. But he also says that one who is addicted to exercise is also bad. Like they're very vain, they spend their life at the gym, looking at, how can we make the human body, how can we elevate this to an unhealthy level, the way that, like, I think it was the Greeks that did that. So, he thinks you should take the middle road on everything. Extremism is bad on each end of the spectrum. So he says you shouldn't go overboard for things like exercise as well. You should have a healthy amount of it. So you should health should be so that you should live longer to serve, so that you should serve Shem longer. You don't want to just waste away and shorten your life because that's less time that you could be around serving Hashem, doing good in the world. So the joke is, I guess, that if you exercise, you'll live on average of 5 years longer. However, those 5 years that you're gonna live are the 5 years that you spent exercising. So in some ways, you can be cheated. Like if you spend all this time exercising so that you'll live longer, and then you die on a motorcycle collision, then you took time away from doing good deeds and learning Torah so that you could go to the gym and exercise, but you don't actually get the benefit. You don't even get to live longer because your life was cut short. So, but at a minimum, if you're going to live 5 years longer, but it takes 5 years of exercise to achieve those 5 years, is it worth devoting the time? But discipline is something that's a real thing that I can relate to. I used to be able to go to an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I would eat just like one plate of food, and I would feel like, I could eat more, but I've also had enough. So why eat more? I was a heavy drinker back then, and I kind of felt like, well, the more I eat, the harder it's going to be to, I'm just going to absorb all the alcohol that I want to drink later. So that was sort of a motivation for not overeating. Now that I don't drink anymore, food can be pretty addictive. It's like, well, this tastes good. Why not go get a second, third plate? So moderation is what you would advocate for. So he advocated for preventive medicine and hygiene, hand washing, and moderation. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. It's a famous quote, I guess, attributed to Benjamin Franklin. This is what Rambam used to teach. So there was a lot of controversies, and he had a legacy. So he faced opposition, particularly for the guide for the perplexed and parts of the Mishnah Torah. They actually burned both of these books for different reasons, but these were his main two works that he did. but they remain highly respected today. So his works influenced later Jewish thinkers like the Maharal of Prague. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. There's a statue outside the synagogue. It's a golem, and he expanded on symbolic interpretations of a Agadah. They say this golem, this is, the Frankenstein statue. That's where the story came from. It was based on that. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. The golem statue, statue. There's the picture right there. It's outside of a synagogue. Statue synagogue. There's the statue. Is that it right there? There's a synagogue that has the statue. Is this it? I don't know if that's it right there. But there's a synagogue that's got a statue um, of it out there, which is kind of creepy, but that does exist. Okay, so there's a side note here. In the 19th century, which I guess I should have put this after we talk about this, but I'll just go in order. There was a 19th century attempt to create a Gemara for Seder Taharot. It was controversial, but it was acknowledged as a compilation, not an original Talmudic text. In the Talmud, you have the Mishnah, and then the Gemara is basically the commentary to the Mishnah. Well, there's some parts that I guess there's no Gemara for it at all. So this one was written as a later compilation. However, Rabbi Shlomo Yehuda Friedlander, he fabricated a Talmud Yerushalmi. There's the Jerusalem Talmud, which is the Gemara from the land of Israel, commenting on the Mishnah. And then there's the Bavli, the Babylonian community, commenting on the Mishnah. So this Friedlander, he tried to write a Gemara and saying, well, this is actually, we found one from the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, Kodashim. And I guess he fooled some scholars before being exposed. You can see it on HebrewBooks.org. As late as the year 2003, it was published as an actual sefer, and they did not acknowledge that it was a forgery. They published it as if it was an authentic Gemara. But he was a Hasidic rabbi that created a Gemara that did not exist in the 19th century. So if this kind of reminds me of the origins of the Zohar we were talking about before the recording, how every scholar and academic will tell you that the Zohar was written by Moshe de Leon, 1270 of the Common Era, and what he did was he attributed it to the Rashbi, who lived a couple thousand years ago. And he said that, well, I found this book. It was passed down from the Rashbi. He finally wrote it down. His wife confessed that it was a forgery. She asked him, why did you work so hard on this? Just to put somebody else's name on it. And he said, if I put my name on it, nobody would buy it. So he kind of confessed that it was a forgery. And this is why Rambam doesn't mention anything that's in the Zohar, because it wasn't written yet. So he never heard of it. But there's people like a lot of ultra Orthodox Jews, they don't care where it came from. They don't care if it came from the Rashbi. They don't care if it came from Moshe de Leon. They don't care if it was 2,000 years ago or from Adam or Rishon. They don't care if it was invented in 1270. They like it. It adds values to their lives, so they are going to embrace it because they like it no matter where it came from. But many people, they believe that it was not from 1270 to Common Era. Even when you prove that he's using language that didn't exist, it would be like, writing a book today that has computers and airplanes and all these electricity, modern laptops, and then saying this was written by somebody 2,000 years ago. They'll say, well, it came from 2,000 years ago. He was just using laptops and airplanes allegorically. He was just using his own language to explain older concepts. Or maybe he wrote those parts that talk about airplanes and laptops, but the rest of it is authentic. And this is just another example of this was in the 19th century, so the 1800s. You had people forging things and pretending that it was part of the Jerusalem Talmud. And it was published in the year 2003, not acknowledging that this has already been proven as a fake. So this is where you have to examine things and say, where did this stuff really come from? Like we were talking about before the recording, how things that Islam took from us, we abandoned, like prostrating, because we don't want to look like them anymore. But other things, rather um, than getting away from it, things that were ours, we bring in other things like parts of our liturgy that we took from the Greeks. And then rather than admit that we took it from them, we just started creating new explanations for it to justify it rather than just saying, we used to do it this way, we got away from it. We incorporated things from other people that we brought in and just acknowledging the actual history. Now we just start inventing new explanations so we don't have to confess, yeah, this is not originally a Jewish author. We took it from our neighbors. So this is where I think learning Jewish history is important, and I think everybody should study history to learn these things. But just to explain this little part a little more, the orders of purity, the 19th century Gemara or Seder Tahorot. The Mishnah was the first major written compilation of Jewish oral law compiled by Yehuda Hanasi around 200 of the Common Era. It's 6 orders. This is the Shas, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, of which Seder Tahorot, purities dealing with ritual purity laws. However, unlike other orders, Tahorot has no Gemara, no Talmudic commentary in either the Babylonian or the Jerusalem Talmud. So this is Jerusalem, this is the Yerushalmi. That's where that Friedlander attempted to say that he found a Gemara in this Jerusalem Talmud, even though it was a fake. The attempt was the 19th century. Someone or a group tried to compose a Gemara-like commentary for Seder Taharot, filling this gap. Controversy was that the effort was contentious because the Talmudic style is historically rooted in the Amoraim, the Talmudic sages of late antiquity. Creating a new Gemara centuries later was seen as an artificial reconstruction. It was not an authentic Talmudic text, but a later compilation raising questions about its authority. Acknowledgement. Despite criticism, it was recognized as a scholarly compilation rather than a forgery, meaning it wasn't falsely presented as an ancient text, but rather as a modern attempt to reconstruct what might have been. And this is what things like, the Tanya and what the Zohar should have been. It should have just been like, this is a new book that we're writing, but instead, people start presenting it as authentic and it's always been here and passed down. Even when Rambam says he didn't have this type of tradition, they're saying, well, that's what he really did. He codified it, so you have to read what he said and understand that he means something that he's not literally saying. When he literally says, I did not receive anything like this. You have to attribute these types of things to him. And I think it's wrong to do that. So here's the Friedlander forgery, a fake Yerushalmi on Kodashim. The Jerusalem Talmud also lacks a complete tractate on Sefer Kodashim, a complete Gemara. This is why I should have put this later on, because we're going to see what Rambam did on the Mishnah section of this. But this is the Kodashim is the laws of sacrifices in the temple, unlike the Babylonian Talmud, which does have some tractates, some commentaries on it. The forgery. Friedlander was a Hasidic rabbi who fabricated a supposed lost Yerushalmi on Kodashim in the 19th century. Deceptively, he presented it as a genuine ancient text fooling some scholars initially. The exposure was eventually experts recognized it as a forgery due to stylistic inconsistencies with authentic Talmudic Aramaic, anachronistic elements, lack of manuscript evidence. Like, well, if this has really been around for a while, where's the actual manuscript of where it was written that you're copying it from? Where's the one that you actually found? So, as I mentioned, it was actually published in 2003 on HebrewBooks.org without acknowledging its fraudulent nature. And this Rabbi Friedlander may have wanted to complete the Talmud, but his method of fabrication rather than transparent scholarship was unethical. So it's just a modern example of why these forgeries are still happening even in modern times. So key differences between the two. Sidrei Taharot, a controversial but honest attempt to reconstruct missing Talmudic material, not claiming to be ancient. Friedlander's, however, was a deliberate forgery, falsely claiming to be rediscovered ancient text. Why does this matter? Authenticity is central to Talmudic scholarship. While filling gaps is laudable, forgery undermines trust in texts. And it creates what you see in other examples. People holding so dear to something that is a forgery that you'll never convince them that it's not, even when every scholar and academic knows that it is, even when it's been proven. So that's why it's not good to create these types of things. Okay, so Friedlander's case shows how even respected figures, a Hasidic rabbi, could engage in deception. So just because he had a beard and black hat does not mean he was incapable of this type of thing. So while Sidrei Taharot represents a more transparent, if debated, scholarly effort. If you're interested, you can search for Freelander's fabricated texts on HebrewBooks.org to see how it was presented before its exposure. Okay, back to Rambam, back to the interesting part of this course, which I feel like I spent too long on that last part anyway. Okay, so Rambam's contributions. They span halacha, philosophy, medicine, and Torah scholarship. His systematic approach to Jewish law and thought remains foundational. His emphasis on rationalism, ethics, and allegorical interpretation continues to shape Jewish learning today. Overview of his work. Okay, so the focus shifts to Rambam and his scholarly contributions. Understanding Rambam's works before analyzing his letters. A commentary on the Mishnah. This is his Perush HaMishnayot. This was written between the ages of 23 and 30. Started during his years of wandering, completed in Egypt. It was written in Arabic using Hebrew letters. So he took the Hebrew alphabet and he used that to spell Arabic words. So this had to be translated to Hebrew later by this family. Was there a question? Or somebody just came unmuted for a minute. So in the general introduction, so this gives us a legal framework of Judaism. The legal structure, including the chain of transmission from Moses to the rabbis. Okay, so he did a commentary to the entire Mishnah. So I don't want you to confuse that with this. I don't see me on the screen, so I'm assuming you can see this book that I'm holding up. This is his introduction to the Mishnah. So I don't want you to confuse this with what we're talking about here, the commentary to the Mishnah. So this introduction to the Mishnah is just an introduction, but it's going to give you the framework of Judaism, the legal structure, and it's going to give you some very valuable things, including the chain of transmission from Moses to the rabbis. Remember last week, I think it was, we talked about the original smicha that Moses gave to Joshua. It went from teacher to student until smicha ended around the 4th century. He gives you a direct chain of this one gave it to this one with the name of each person. And these were the people that gave us the Sanhedrin. This was like the Supreme Court. That's the essence of Torah Sheba al Peh, the oral law. Now today, you have a lot of people saying everything is halakha l'Moshe Sinai. It came from Moses at Mount Sinai. In some ways, it's like if they don't know the actual source, they'll just use that to say, well, it was given to Moses, and it's been passed down as a tradition since then. In this introduction to the Mishnah, he actually lists them. I read them all in a video on my channel. It's called Halakha L'Moshe Sinai, but it is 30 items. So it's not everything that you don't know the source for was given to Moses. It's a specific list of things according to Rambam. So in the Mishnah, things were passed down orally. It was finally written down. The rulings of the court were written down in the Mishnah. But he gives you the whole structure of how it works. And there are people that believe the entire Talmud was memorized word for word and passed down until it was written down. And this is not such a credible claim. Anybody that's ever played that game of broken telephone knows it can be a couple sentences and you pass through a couple people and you already don't have it. So it's not an accurate claim that the whole Talmud was memorized. But there's one section in here I want to read to you in the introduction to the Mishnah. It's called Dissenting Opinions. It explains why we have these debates, why they were recorded. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, found it necessary to include the opinions of both sides to a dispute. Had he only written the final decisions, leaving out the opinions that were rejected, this could raise serious problems. It could happen that one who had received a contradictory halakha from a sage who held an opposing view might cause us to wonder, how could this man, who obviously is a trustworthy person, receive a tradition that a certain food is forbidden when the Mishnah says that it is permitted, or vice versa, that something is permitted when the Mishnah says it is forbidden. Now that the opposing view is also written in the Mishnah, such misunderstandings will not happen. For if someone should say, I have heard that such and such is forbidden, we will be able to tell him, you are quite right. What you have heard is indeed the opinion of one rabbi. But the majority disagreed with him, or another rabbi disagreed with him, and the halakha was decided according to the other rabbi, either because his reasoning was more logical, or because we found another opinion supporting him. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi also felt it was necessary to record the opinion of an individual, even when the opposing view was the majority view. So he didn't just say, okay, well, the issue's been settled. The majority voted. This is the halakha now. He wanted to record the minority dissenting view because this topic could come up later and more logical explanations could be made and the law could be overturned. And what used to be the majority, may now be the minority once we make compelling arguments and we overturn the law, just like what happens today in law. That happened on the Sanhedrin. So he wanted a record of the minority dissenting view in case we ever overturn it. So this was because the final law may be eventually decided according to the individual. The fact that he did so also teaches us that if an individual's argument is clear and straightforward, we should listen to it, even if a large number of people oppose it. He also recorded the original opinion of a sage who later changed his mind. For example, Beit Shammai say one thing, Beit Hillel say something else. But Beit Hillel changed their mind and agreed with Beit Shammai. He did this to show how much they loved the truth, and in order to promote righteousness and integrity. These men were respected, pious, noble, and very learned. Yet when one realized that his opponent's reasoning was better than his own, and his opponent's analysis was correct, he admitted it. Certainly, we too should admit when we are wrong, and we should not be stubborn. This is what the Torah means when it says, pursue perfect honesty. And the sages comment on this, acknowledge the truth. Meaning, although you could defend yourself through convincing arguments, if you know that your opponent's claims are right, but that he is intimidated or that you have greater verbal skill and can convince him that you are correct, you should withdraw your opinion and accept his. So it doesn't matter if this is an ultra Orthodox rabbi with a beard and a black hat, and he's arguing with somebody clean shaven, doesn't even wear a kippah. If his argument is correct, you should accept his argument and say, you know what, he's right. Even if my group is popular, that doesn't mean that we should do something that's wrong just because it's popular. This was actually one reason why, when we get to the halakha and the Mishnah Torah, Rambam did not include sources because he didn't want the truth to be determined by who said it. When there's a disagreement, and the Ravad says this, and the Radbaz says that, he doesn't want someone to come in and say, yeah, but Rashi says this. Oh, well, there you go. If Rashi says it, that Rashi's never wrong. He's so popular. He's in every Chumash. He wants the truth to be decided by the truth, not by name dropping. So this is why he gives you these examples, and so that's the whole. It goes more in detail how the system functions, but that's what you're going to get here. But this, again, I don't see the camera on my screen, so I'm assuming you can see it. This was like $12 on Amazon. Highly recommend it. It's only something like a little over 100 pages. That's the introduction to the Mishnah. The Perush HaMishnayot, the commentary to the Mishnah, he goes through the entire Mishnah, the whole Talmud, the Mishnah part of it, the Gemara comments on, and he gives you a commentary to every section in the Mishnah. I think he was the first to do that because there's parts of it where, like we said, there is no Gemara on it, but he did go through the entire thing and comment on it. So he was actually pretty proud of that. Okay, so the introduction to the Sanhedrin. This is Perek Halak, chapter 10. It contains the 13 principles of Jewish faith. This is what everybody always calls Rambam's 13 principles, which became a cornerstone of the Jewish theology. Everybody will tell you you've got to believe in Rambam's 13 principles, even though they don't believe in his 13 principles the way that Rambam himself believed in some of them. But they include principles like belief in God's existence and unity, God's incorporeality, the eternity of the Torah, resurrection of the dead, etc. He presents these as fundamental beliefs for Jewish identity. There's even people that tell you you're not Jewish if you don't believe in these 13 principles. I guess now whether you're Jewish or not depends on what you believe, not whether you're halakhically Jewish or not. I guess when it's convenient, we can exclude people based on beliefs. But there are examples of people like Yosef Albo, who wrote Sefer Iri Karim, the book of principles. He believed there was only three, that you have to believe in God, his revelation at Mount Sinai, which was the giving of the Torah, and that there is a divine system of reward and punishment, either when you're alive on this world or that you're going to find out after we die. A divine system of reward and punishment. So there's really three principles that Yosef Albo wrote. And there was somebody who said, I don't remember who it was, but they said you only have to believe in one thing, that God exists. Believe that he exists and do what he says. So there are people that don't believe in all 13 principles, and they're not considered heretics. But it's very popular today that everyone's going to say you have to believe in these 13. Okay, the 8 chapters. This is a strange one because it really only has 5 chapters. So I'm not really sure why it's called the 8 chapters. But it's structured around themes like the nature of the soul, which is Aristotelian psychology, the balance of virtues, influenced by Aristotle's golden mean, and topics like free will and divine providence. So I'm not really so familiar with Aristotle, but Rambam, he was a big fan of Aristotle, but I guess everybody was. For over 1,000 years, this was the science of the time, the way they thought the universe functioned, flat Earth, all of this stuff. This came from Aristotle. So this was everybody in the area believed in that. So of course he was going to draw on that. The introduction to Seder Tahorot, order of purity. A technical analysis of the most complex section of the Mishnah. There's no Gemara on this except for the section of Nida. Rambam provides a systematic analysis clarifying obscure laws since there was no extensive Talmudic discussion on most of these topics. In his commentary to the Mishnah, it's more than just a commentary. It's a legal, theological, and ethical guide that laid the groundwork for his later works, two that I'm most familiar with, the Mishnah Torah and the Guide for the Perplexed, also known as the Moriim and Abibukum. It's a blend of halacha and philosophy, the original work. It makes it unique in rabbinic literature, and he went through it throughout his whole life and he made revisions to it. He updated his commentary throughout his life, sometimes referencing later works like the Mishnah Torah, meaning he would say in his Perusha Mishnayot, which he did first, there's sections where he would say, I expand on this later in greater detail in the Mishnah Torah, but the Mishnah Torah hadn't been written yet. So his Perusha Mishnayot had been written in manuscript form and distributed, and people were copying it and distributing it. And then he went back later and he wrote revisions to it. We didn't have a printing press, so now you would have first edition, second edition. So this is partially why you'll see discrepancies in some of the printed versions today. Well, did you get the original one? Sometimes the printers weren't able to tell if these were handwritten notes in the margins, so they included it. But this goes to show that he did revise these things throughout his lifetime. Because he mentions Mishnah Torah in books that predate the Mishnah Torah. Okay, Sefer HaMitzvot. I need to get myself up on the screen here so I can see what the camera is showing. So Sefer HaMitzvot was written in Arabic, later translated to Hebrew, then retranslated by Yosef Karpak. Karpak was a Temani, a Yemenite rabbi who lived much later. He translated it into a better Hebrew and then eventually English. How do I get you guys back on the screen? So I can see. Full screen. That's not what I want because I still need to go and see. Okay, there's me on the screen. Okay. Sefer HaMitzvot. The first version that I got was this. I got it on eBay used. Came from a library. It's very Shakespearean. It says, Wherefore art thou, Romeo? It speaks like that. It's two books, the positive commandments and the negative commandments. So you can get them used on eBay. I got it pretty affordable. That was my first version. That'll give you the 613 commandments according to Rambam with their explanations. There's a better version though, which looks like this. I think this one came from Amazon. It's written in modern day language, so it's a little easier to read. And also, for Rambam to count something as one of the 613 mitzvot, he has a system of 14 metrics. It needs to check 14 boxes in order for him to count it as one of the 613 commandments in the Torah. That's a very long explanation. That is included in this version. Where the other one that I showed you, it just gives you the 613 and their explanations. So if you want the long 100-page introduction, which explains a lot of these things, you'll want to get one of these. So that's the one that I recommend. Okay. I think Sefer HaMitzvot used to be part of Mishnah Torah, and they separated it. So now Mishnah Torah is separate from Sefer HaMitzvot. So, however, in Mishnah Torah, it lists the 613 mitzvot, but it doesn't give you the explanations. But if you want the explanations on how to comply and fulfill each one of these mitzvot, you've got to get Sefer HaMitzvot. Mishnah Torah is going to list what they are, and then it's going to go into what the halacha is. So I recommend everybody get Sefer HaMitzvot if you can. Okay, the purpose of it. This was the precursor to Mishnah Torah, listing all 613, 248 positive mitzvot, 365 negative mitzvot. This was his introductory work to the Mishnah Torah. I think it was like the original introduction to Mishnah Torah, which again later got separated. But the concept of 613 comes from Chazal. So now we're going to get into the fascinating stuff. You've stuck with me through all the boring explanation that we've gone so far. Appreciate it. Now is when it gets interesting. Somebody timestamp. If you want a boring stuff, this is where it comes in the video. Okay, so why do we have 600? So I want you to understand the timeline. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai 1,300 and some odd years before the Common Era. We are now 2,000, more than 2,000 years after the Common Era. 2025 now, plus over 1,300. That's over 3,300 years ago, right? So everybody understands how many thousands of years ago the Torah was given. When did we figure out that there are 613 commandments? Is there 613? Is there more? When did we get this number? Where does the number come from? You know, it kind of seems like, well, it's always been this way, right? We knew from Mount Sinai this was the number, but it's not true. And we're going to find out where it actually comes from. Okay, so everybody, if you're not familiar with Gematria, the Hebrew alphabet, every letter is not only a letter, it's also a number. So when you write a word, you spell it with these letters, but you're also, these characters that are letters are also numbers. So each word also has a numerical value. Now later on, they figured out ways to say, okay, well, if you add these letters or numbers, you get a number. And that will give you the same numerical value as this other word. They share the same numerical value. So therefore, they must be connected. Well, and then you can build a narrative off of that. Because there's other words that have the same numerical value, but it doesn't fit their narrative, so they ignore that. And if you can't get this narrative out of adding the numbers together, then you can multiply the number to get a different number, which gives you a different set of words that have the same numerical value. Anyway, that's Gematria. So Torah has the numerical value of 611. So the conversation was, how many commandments are there in Torah? Well, Torah means instructions, and it has the numerical value of 611. So it must be that there's 611 commandments in Torah. So then another rabbi comes in and says, well, we heard two from God himself at Mount Sinai. So that must mean that we got 611 commandments from Moses and two from God himself. So it must be that there's 613 commandments. And this is the explanation of how we came to the conclusion that there's 613 commandments in Torah. So literally, the rabbis decided 613 is the number there needs to be, even though there's more. So 613 is the number of commandments that we need to have, decided by rabbis. That is the literal explanation. And I'm going to prove it to you, coming up very shortly. Okay, so they did not enumerate. They did not go through and say, this is commandment number one, this is commandment number two. So I think the first person to try and actually list what the 600 or whatever number they came up with was called the Bahad. And we're not even sure who this person is. They suspect it's different people. Okay, so this was written around the year 741 of the Common Era. So 1,300 years until the Common Era, and then another 700 years after that was when the first person said, what are these 613 commandments? Which ones are commandments? Which ones are not? So he was the first one at 741 of the Common Era. And there are different opinions as to who this actually was, but the author included rabbinic mitzvot like Hanukkah, lighting candles as a mitzvah. Well, Hanukkah happened, way after the Torah was given. So how can anything having to do with Hanukkah be a Torah mitzvah, a Torah commandment? So obviously this is why are we calling it a mitzvah? A mitzvah is a Torah commandment. Halakha is laws enacted by the Sanhedrin. Minhagim are customs and traditions that people came up with. So why are we calling this a mitzvah if it happened over 1,000 years after the Torah was given? So this is in the year 700. Fast forward a couple hundred years into the 900s. This is where we have Rav Sadia Gaon he enumerated the what are the Torah commandments also. And I don't remember what his book was called, where he listed them. But he was several generations. He was one of the Gaonim. The generation following the Gaonim was the Rishonim. This is what Rambam was. He was a Rishon. So fast forward to Rambam, who lived several generations later. He was born in 1135. He ended up writing Sefer HaMitzvot. So sometime between 1135 of the Common Era and 1204 of the Common Era, that's when he wrote Sefer HaMitzvot. So 1300 years before the Common Era is when the Torah was given. So after the Torah, we fast forward 1300 years. Then we fast forward another 1100 years, and we get to Rambam, and he's writing Sefer HaMitzvot. So this is thousands of years, and we still don't even know which ones are the Torah commandments. So even today, we have different lists, and we don't agree on what the Torah commandments are. You're probably thinking, what do you mean we don't agree? We don't know today, in the year 2025, what the Torah commandments are and what they're not? It's true. We don't agree on them. So here's an example. Sefer HaMitzvot, written by Rambam, in some ways is an attack on the Bahag because he lists not only the Hanukkah candles, but also hearing the Megillah. The Megillah is the story of Purim. This happens far after Torah in Persia. You know, Mordecai and Esther. So, how can this be a Torah commandment to listen to the Megillah? It happened way after the Torah. So he says these are not Torah commandments, and this is part of the reason why he made the goal of writing Sefer HaMitzvot. Another example is not to leave manna overnight. How can this be a permanent mitzvah? Is this one of the 613? That was only applicable to that generation. So if it doesn't apply to every generation, it can't apply today. We can't count this as a mitzvah. This is not a Torah commandment that applies to us. So he was attacking these principles because that manna was time bound only to those people. The Bahag was counting things that have multiple steps like sacrifices. First, you have to select the animal. Then the animal has to be given to the Kohanim. It has to be slaughtered in a certain way. Blood has to be, sprinkled on the altar. Organs have to be separated and burned. These are all different mitzvot. It's a list of many things that are just steps to fulfill one mitzvah, doing the animal sacrifice. So it wasn't systematic until Rambam. He created the system, and that's these 14 shorashim, the 14 root principles. Instead of just saying, well, manna is a Torah commandment, things that happened after Torah, like Hanukkah, that's a Torah commandment. Thousands of years of after passing down traditions of how to be Jewish, how to live in a covenant with Hashem. We still don't even know what the Torah commandments are. So that's why he wrote Sefer HaMitzvot, so everybody could understand what they are, and not just because I say they are. There's all these people before that said what they are. Clearly, as he's demonstrating, there's problems with their system. So he set out to fix it. So not only am I going to tell you what the Torah commandments are, I'm going to tell you how I arrived at them. So you can see that it makes sense. That's why I'm counting this one, and that's why I'm not counting that one. Yeah. So it needs to meet 14 metrics, 14 boxes that have to be checked. So we'll go through them. Okay, the first principle, not to be enumerated, are the commandments that are rabbinically enacted, like lighting Hanukkah candles is a rabbinic commandment, and thus it cannot be counted as one of the 613 Torah commandments. The second principle is that not all that we derive through one of the 13 hermeneutical rules by which the Torah is expounded or through a superfluous element in the Torah's terminology is to be enumerated. Example, the prohibition of marrying a woman and her daughter is derived from Gezerah Shava, a verbal analogy, but it is still counted because it is explicit in the intent, unlike other purely derived laws. The third one, I'm just going to go through these quickly, not spend too much time on each one, is not to be enumerated are those commandments that do not apply for all time. The command to exterminate Amalek was situational and not perpetual, so it is excluded. I've also shared in the Torah Judaism International, there's a good shiur about why halakhically you can't count Hamas or Nazis as Amalek. I recommend everybody watch that. It's incorrect to just say everybody you don't like is Amalek. Therefore, this applies today. I have to call you Amalek, and therefore I have to exterminate it. So it's a legally speaking, it's just wrong to do so. And this is one of those principles. Okay, the fourth principle, not to be enumerated, are commandments that relate to all the commandments of the Torah as a whole. Be holy is a general imperative, not a specific commandment. So just because Hashem said something, it's words that came out of his mouth, it was dictated to Moses, doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actual Torah commandment. Let there be light. He said that. It was a statement, but is that a commandment? Maybe a commandment to the universe, but it didn't apply to us. So for our purposes, it's not one of 613. Okay, the fifth one is the Torah stated reason for a commandment is not to be enumerated is a commandment itself. Example, do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. Um, the reason if you were strangers is not a separate command. So that's not counted as a Torah command. It is explained as halakha, and this will be in Mishnah Torah, how halakhically do we turn this statement from the Torah into halakha. But it's not counted as one of the Torah commandments, as one of the 613. The sixth one is with a commandment composed of a positive and a negative. The former, meaning the positive, is to be numbered with the positive commandments, and the latter, meaning the negative, is to be counted with the negative. Example, observe the Sabbath is positive, do not work on it, negative, are counted separately. The seventh principle, not to be enumerated, are the halakhic details of the commandment. The specifics on how to tie tefillin, straps, and knots are details, not separate commandments. So fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, that's one commandment. All the details are separate details, not separate Torah commandments. 8. Negations are not to be enumerated among the negative commandments. Example, there shall be no rain for your land is a warning, not a prohibition, so it's excluded. 9. Not to be enumerated are the written negative and positive commandments themselves, but rather what we are warned against doing and commanded to do. Example, do not murder is a prohibition, but the written phrase itself isn't the mitzvah. The act of prohibition is. The 10th principle, not to be enumerated, are instructions that are prerequisites to a particular goal, like taking flour, bake it into matzah is a preparatory to eating matzah on Passover, not a standalone command. 11. The parts of a commandment are not to be enumerated individually if they comprise a single commandment. Example, the 4 species of Sukkot are one mitzvah, not 4 separate commands. The 12th principle not to be enumerated is every detail of an act we are commanded to perform. The slaughtering example, sprinkling the blood, burning the fat, the example that I just brought up. 13, the number of commandments does not correspond to the number of days on which a certain commandment is obligated. The daily Talmud offering is one commandment, even though it is performed every day. And 14, the 14th principle, the stated implementation of punishments is not to be enumerated as positive commandments. Example, the court shall flog the guilty. That's a judicial procedure, not a positive mitzvah. So he came up with these 14 rules and then went through the Torah and said which ones actually meet all 14 of these before he listed them. Okay, so then he separated them, as I showed you, into separate books, positive and negative. So we have 248, which corresponds to the limbs or parts of the human body. I think this includes like ligaments and things like that. I asked a friend of mine, he was a surgeon, but he went back to school to become an anesthesiologist. So I figured he would know better than anybody. Is that true? There's really 248. He said I never counted them, so um, he wouldn't say that that's actually based on truth, but it's based on Talmudic anatomy. Makot 23b is the source. The list of negative commandments, there's 365 of those, corresponding to the days of the solar year. So since these are the negative ones, it kind of means every day you're supposed to not do negative things. So there's one for each day of the year. So this symbolizes every day requires vigilance against sin. Although this brings up a question as why did they use a solar calendar to symbolize that? We use a lunar calendar. Okay, so this concept of there being 613 commandments, where does this come from? Here is the actual sources. Uh, this is basically it. Unless it's repeated somewhere else in the Torah, this is the entire discussion about it. Okay, Rabbi Simlai taught there were 613 mitzvot stated to Moses in the Torah, consisting of 365 corresponding to the number of days in the solar year, 248 positive mitzvot corresponding to the number of a person's limbs. Rav, I don't know how to say his name. This rabbi said, what is the verse that alludes to this? It's written, Moses commanded us. The Torah is an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. Deuteronomy, the word Torah, in terms of its numerical value, the gematria. Okay, so this is the actual source, and is 611. The number of mitzvot that we received and taught by Moses must be Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. It must be 611 because that's the gematria of Torah. In addition, there are two mitzvot. I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods. This were the first two of the 10 commandments that we heard from the mouth of the Almighty for a total of 613. So it must be based on this that there's 613 commandments in the Torah. So later works after Sefer HaMitzvot was Nachmanides Ramban. He lived in the 13th century. These are the 1200s. So he lived after Rambam. Their lives overlapped a little, but they didn't actually meet. So Ramban, he criticized Rambam's count, arguing that, well, the commandments, some of them that Rambam listed, these are derivatives of things rather than independent commandments himself. Ramban said that the 248, 365 is more conceptual rather than literal. His argument was, why do we have to have 613 commandments? That was only the opinion of one person in the Talmud. Talmud has lots of opinions. There's only one person in the Talmud that said 613 is the actual number. So why should we have to stick to it? There's lots of opinions in the Talmud we don't hold by. We don't say, well, this is one opinion, so therefore we can't change what we think about it. There's other rabbis in the opinion that disagree on every topic. So that's how he felt. Why was this opinion elevated to such a level that we can't deviate from it? Go ahead. Did you have a question, or did you just come unmuted? It looks like she came unmuted. Okay, so Ramban did not feel like we needed to stick to Rambam's methodology, and he didn't even feel like we needed to stick to 613 as a number. He felt like we could come up with other numbers other than 613. His problem with it was if you wanted to add a mitzvah, then you would have to remove one to stay at 613. So every time he finds something that he says, we should be counting this as it's prescriptive. This is something we need to do. But if I count it, then I'll be at 614. So if I add this as another mitzvah, then I have to remove one. So ultimately, he ended up deciding that, you know what, if they said 613 was the number, then we should stick with it. So he stuck with 613 himself. He said if something was true, then we don't want to say it's not true. So that must mean that we can combine and divide them in different ways. but 613 is the number we have to stick with. So there's an example of this. I looked it up once. I know there's a commandment that you're supposed to build a guardrail on your roof because if you don't and somebody falls off, then it's as if you placed a stumbling block in front of them and forced them to fall. And that is one of the ones I know it's in the Torah, and I looked it up in Sefer Mitzvot. It's not there. But how can it not be there? So Rambam combines it with "do not stand idly by as innocent blood is being shed." So that's one example where you can find a commandment that you know is a Torah, and it's not listed. You had to combine them to make the number 613 stick. So Ramban had an issue with that. He wanted to add others, like Rambam doesn't count it as a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel. For it to be a mitzvah, it has to apply to all generations. How can that apply to a generation that's exiled? Can't fulfill that mitzvah. So therefore, it can't be one of them. Ramban disagreed and said that should be a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel. But what do I do? Add it to Rambam's, and now we had 614. So that was his issue. He's like, which one do I subtract so that I can add one? So he actually didn't, he wanted to argue against 613 being a number we have to keep, but he did end up keeping the number. So Ramban comes up with 613, but Ramban and Rambam, they don't match. So if you just take what Rambam has, take the ones that Ramban has, that Rambam does not, and you already have more than 613. So combine and divide them in different ways, you'll always end up with 613. After Rambam did Sefer HaMitzvot, Ramban did his, then we have Sefer HaChinuk. It says anonymous because we're not sure who the actual author is. I read that we think it's this one or that one, but we really don't know. But it organizes them a little differently, and it kind of blends Rambam and Ramban's. It takes most of Rambam's, but it likes some of Ramban's explanations, so it kind of blends them. It's mostly Rambam with some of Ramban's. So it follows Rambam's count, but it adjusts it slightly, acknowledging some flexibility in classification. It's mostly Rambam with a few of Ramban's arguments. So perhaps somewhere between 85 and 95% of the 613 follow Rambam, with the rest following Rambam. This shows that even today there are disagreements about whether something is a Torah mitzvah or not. Living in the land of Israel is one of the examples where Ramban counts it as a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel, even though he himself did not live in the land of Israel for most of his life. So even though he would count it as a mitzvah, that's like one you don't really have to fulfill. He counts it as a mitzvah, but he's like, there could be good reasons for not fulfilling the mitzvah. If I make money doing what I do for a living in another country, then I should live in that country and not fulfill the mitzvah of living there. So you can just put Torah mitzvot off. If I make enough money, if I invest well, then at the end of my life, when I retire, then I can move to Israel and I can fulfill the mitzvah of living in Israel then. And that's what he did. At the end of his life, he moved to Israel, where he counts that as a mitzvah and was able to fulfill it. But to me, Rambam's explanation why it's not a mitzvah makes more sense. And even if you go with Ramban's explanation, well, it is a Torah commandment, it is a mitzvah, but you don't have to fulfill it. That to me just puts us on the slippery slope to where now it's not very far in your reform. Well, we don't have to do that Torah commandment. It may be a mitzvah, but it doesn't apply to me today. It's optional. I have an issue with that. So, but I mean, it does go to show that before you write somebody off, whether it's reform, conservative, even to this very day, we don't agree what a Torah commandment is. There's people, I heard somebody say the other day, all the Gedolim today, all the big rabbis today, if you combine them together, they don't equal the small toenail of Ramban. Ramban lived, 700, 800 years ago. All the biggest rabbis today, with all the technology that we have, internet, we can look up all the sources. We don't have to scan manuscripts to find out what this word means. You can, with a search, find out all the times it was used, what context. All the biggest rabbis today don't equal the smallest toenail of Rambam. That to me just means you're elevating these rabbis to a very unhealthy level. But even those big rabbis then and now, we don't agree. So there's valid reasons where, you know, Torah somewhat has evolved, at least in the commandments and what we consider commandments and how we fulfill them. We don't agree today. So this kind of gives credibility to other streams of Judaism saying, you know what? We don't have to blindly follow what you say. Just because you have a beard and a black hat and a tradition does not mean that everybody has to accept that. Again, it's a slippery slope once you start allowing people to do that. So you really have to look at what are you trying to dismiss? What are you considering optional? And for me personally, Rambam's legal system makes the most sense. It's a Torah commandment. You can't do away with it. It endorses halacha from the Sanhedrin, not halacha from three YouTube rabbis that form the Bet Din, people that had smicha going back to Moses, sat on the Sanhedrin. That is law. That's halacha. That's binding on everybody. Later minhagim, these are customs and traditions. They're not binding on anybody other than the people that choose to accept them. This system makes the most sense. This is why I follow Rambam's system. But when people say he's not the end all be all, there are people who disagree. As we see, Ramban, people today, there are people who disagree. Okay, back to Sefer HaMitzvot. So his purpose was to list the 613, the positive and negative, which he did. It was written in Arabic, structured. It lists the positive and negative separately, which can be somewhat awkward because Shabbat laws are split. Do not violate Shabbat. Don't do this. Not sure what the other example was, but you have Shabbat laws in the positive and the separate. So it's not like Shabbat are all listed here. You can find laws regarding Shabbat in both books. Okay, the controversy. His methodology was debated, how you count them, particularly by Ramban, who we just talked about. He disagreed on some of the inclusions and exclusions. The example of that is living in the land of Israel or settling there as a positive mitzvah, while Rambam does not count it. Okay, what page are we on here? Let's see. We're on page 22. Um, okay, this may be a good place to stop. We'll go through this part real quick and then we'll stop. Okay, so his primary works, his Parush HaMishnayot, commentary to the entire Mishnah, not to be confused with his introduction to the Mishnah. So that's the whole commentary, not just the introduction. I recommend you guys get the introduction to the Mishnah on Amazon. It's got a lot of good information in there, including Halakha Moshe Sinai. Okay, Sefer HaMitzvot, that's what we just talked about. It was the original introduction to the Mishnah Torah, but it's the 613 commandments and their explanations. I recommend getting the modern version on Amazon, which gives you the 14 metrics that we just looked at. Okay, then Mishnah Torah. This is his magnum opus for me because I'm legalistic. So this will tell you how to master halacha, including how it functions, and this is how you can paskin halacha. This is the only complete codification of halacha that we have to this very day. So if you're legal minded, you want to know how to be a frum kosher Jew, this is what you need, Mishnah Torah. If you are more philosophy minded, you want to understand how creation works, how the universe functions, how Hashem interacts and relates to it, and that's your connection, then Mora Nevuchim would be his magnum opus. So these are the two later ones, depending on what type of person you are. I identify more with Mishnah Torah. If you're more philosophy minded, you might identify more with the Guide for the Perplexed. So two different audiences. Mishnah Torah is for laymen who want to know how to comply with the law. The Guide for the Perplexed is for more advanced people who are struggling with philosophy. How do I make what we know today with science, Big Bang Theory, evolution? How do I make all this fit with my religion? That's what you're going to find in Guide for the Perplexed. If you don't struggle with these things, then you don't need it. You can just stick with Mishnah Torah. If you do struggle with those things, then that's what the Guide for Perplexed is for. And then he wrote a bunch of letters, a bunch of teshuvot. His correspondence is providing context and clarification. Okay, just real quick, we talked about the Torah being a living system. I don't like the sound of that because this says, okay, well, this is what Reform use. They may have a valid, you know, a valid argument, but what they do with it, I do not endorse. So Rambam's works show Judaism as a structured, evolving tradition, which is true. With revisions to his texts, that means it has evolved. Debates over mitzvah counting, that has evolved to this very day. However, it must be mentioned that halakha is a separate animal, which is dealt with in Hilchot Mamre. That can be found in the Mishnah Torah. That is not an evolving thing. That is very systematic. The Torah was given by God. The commandments tell us not to stray left or right of the rulings of the court, to do according to all that they instruct you. Okay, that's talking about the Sanhedrin. That does not evolve. How the Sanhedrin functions is dealt with in Hilchot Mamrim. This is why we cannot change halakha that they enacted, which is binding on the entire people. And it tells you there, in future generations where there is no Sanhedrin, that's today, you have minhagim. Different communities can create minhagim. They're not binding on any other community. They're not binding on any other generation. So this is a system that does not evolve. And it tells you there will come a time where you can change halakha. And it tells you what is required in order to do that. In a future generation, we'll have a new Sanhedrin, and they will meet the metrics required in order to overturn the previous Sanhedrin. So that does not evolve. Okay, then we're going to get into, we'll stop here because the next book we're going to get into is Mishnah Torah. That'll probably be several weeks dealing with Mishnah Torah itself, but we're on page 22 there. So we'll stop here, and the next several weeks we'll start dealing with Mishnah Torah. Thank you everybody for being here, and we'll see you all next week. We'll stop the recording and we'll continue to talk here in the live class. Okay.